Picture this. You're standing in a windswept field in 10th century Iceland. The cold bites through your cloak, and the sky above is bruised with storm. Across from you, a man is shouting a single word that will change your life forever. Argr. To the modern ear, it sounds foreign, even harmless. But in Viking society, being called argr was the social equivalent of being cursed, defiled, erased. It didn't just hurt your pride, it destroyed your identity. Among the Norse, masculinity wasn't a vague cultural ideal. It was law, it was religion, it was survival, and argr, translated roughly as unmanly, effeminate, or even morally corrupt, was the most devastating accusation one man could throw at another. This wasn't just name-calling. This was a need, a ritualized verbal attack with legal weight behind it. If someone called you argr in public, you had two choices: challenge them to a duel and fight for your honor, or accept the label and be socially annihilated. There was no in-between. If you ignored the accusation, the law was clear. You were guilty. And if you were guilty, you lost everything. In Icelandic legal codes like the sagas, argr wasn't just shameful, it was criminal. It implied that a man had behaved in ways that violated the deepest codes of masculine honor: cowardice, submission in same-sex encounters, or the practice of magic, especially cedar, a form of sorcery seen as spiritually dangerous and explicitly feminine. Even the god Odin wasn't above this shame. According to the Ynglinga saga, Odin was mocked for using cedar. It was said that no real man could touch it without disgrace. So imagine what it meant when someone accused a living man, not a mythic god, of being argr. It was a death sentence dressed in words. And worse, if the accused did nothing, society had the right to finish what the insult started. Not with jail, not with exile, but with obliteration. Now imagine this. You've been accused of being argr, and you didn't fight back. Maybe out of fear. Maybe because there was no point. Maybe because deep down, you knew no duel would clear your name. So the law decides for you. And the sentence is as final as death. Skogangr. It means going into the forest. But don't let the poetry fool you. This wasn't exile. This was ritual erasure. In Viking Iceland, Skogangr wasn't a punishment you could outlive. It stripped a man of all legal protection. He became útlagr, an outlaw. But not in the Hollywood sense. This wasn't adventure. It wasn't rebellion. It was annihilation. Outlaws were no longer considered human in the eyes of the law. Anyone could kill them. No consequences. No blood price. No guilt. Killing an outlaw was often encouraged, rewarded even. The dead man's belongings could become the killer's prize, and for those branded argr, this wasn't just legal execution, it was a kind of metaphysical destruction. They weren't just criminals, they were polluted. Their masculinity wasn't broken, it was inverted, and that made them dangerous. Men like this were seen as spiritual threats, living contradictions to everything the Norse world believed made a man worthy. They were sent away, not just to die, but to vanish. No shelter, no fire, no food, no family, no prayers said, no names remembered. The wilderness swallowed them whole, silent pine forests, frozen rivers, endless nights filled with wolves. You could last a season if you were lucky, a few months maybe, like Grettir Asmundarsson, who became a legend for enduring the brutal solitude. But most didn't. Most froze, or starved, or went mad, screaming into trees that never answered. Because Skogangr wasn't just about punishment. It was about forgetting. And the moment your feet left the village trail behind you, you were already dead. Picture this. You're not just alone in the wild, you're being hunted. To the Vikings, law was more than justice. It was identity. A man outside the law wasn't just criminal, he was inhuman. The útlagr, the outlaw, was described in legal codes as like a wolf in the forest. And that wasn't metaphor, it was instruction. You were no longer a man. You were prey. Anyone, friend, neighbor, even kin, could strike you down. And not only would they face no punishment, they might earn honor for doing it. You were marked, visible and invisible, as a threat to the moral fabric of society. If you had once owned land, it was forfeit. If you had a family, they were warned, help this man, and you share his fate. No one would shelter you, no one would speak your name, no one would mourn you. The only justice left was the justice others took from your life. And what made this worse, what made it unbearable, was the why. These weren't always murderers or thieves. Sometimes they were men accused of unmanly behavior. That meant practicing cedar, the woman's magic, or taking the passive role in same-sex relations, or simply failing to conform to brutal expectations of masculinity. These were not crimes of action. They were crimes of identity. The punishment wasn't designed to correct you. It wasn't meant to rehabilitate. It was crafted to erase, to make an example of your suffering, to purge society of whatever made you different. And so the forest wasn't just a place of exile, it was a stage for your slow death, a death with no song, no stone, no saga. You would die like an animal, and the world would keep turning, as if you'd never drawn breath at all. Imagine this. You weren't killed in a duel, you didn't die in the forest, but something even worse has happened. Your family, the people who once raised you, laughed with you, sat beside you at the fire, are pretending you never existed. In Viking culture, identity wasn't yours alone. It belonged to your clan, your bloodline. A man's value was measured not just by his own deeds, but by his ancestors and descendants. Names mattered, stories mattered, honor was inherited. But when a man was called argr, that chain broke, and the family, the very thing that should have protected you, cut you loose to save themselves, because dishonor wasn't something you suffered alone. It was contagious. It bled through the generations. If your father was a nightingale, a dishonored man, you were suspect. If your brother was accused of orgy, your daughter might not marry. Land rights, social status, political voice, all of it could crumble under the weight of that one poisoned word. And so families made a brutal choice. They erased you. Your name vanished from oral histories. Your deeds went unmentioned in the sagas. Your place in the family line was left blank, as though you had never drawn breath. This wasn't accidental forgetting. It was strategic amnesia. To preserve the family's future, they sacrificed their past, you. And so, in death, or worse, in exile, you became a ghost, not the honored kind whose name was sung at feasts or carved into stones, but the other kind, the kind no one dared to speak of, the kind who haunted the edges of memory, unwanted and unloved. Even if you lived to be old, your bloodline would deny you. You could be a man who walked the earth for 60 winters, and in the stories that survived, you were nothing. Not a hero, not a villain, just gone. So how did it happen? How did one word, argr, gain so much power, enough to exile, erase, even kill? Because to the Norse, masculinity wasn't just a set of traits. It was sacred law. It meant courage, violence when needed, dominance, and control. A man who deviated from this script wasn't simply weak, he was dangerous. The accusation of argr worked like a ritual spell. It didn't describe you, it redefined you. Not as flawed, but as corrupted, inverted. A threat to everything that held the Norse world together. To be called argr wasn't about what you did, but what you were. Too soft, too passive, too different, too much like a woman in a world where being feminine was a sin, for men. And that's where it gets darker still. Because in this society, gender wasn't just role, it was rank. Women had their own codes, their own honor, but a man who acted like a woman broke the hierarchy. And that scared people, enough to turn a word into a weapon. Argr could mean you practiced magic. Satyr, the sorcery associated with women and spirits, Odin himself was mocked for it. It could mean you submitted in sex to another man, something considered the ultimate degradation. Or it could simply mean you lacked drengskaper, the noble virtue of honorable manhood. And the moment that word was spoken, your fate began to unravel. The law said you must respond, with a duel, with blood, with proof that you were still a man worth fearing. But if you stayed silent, the law declared you guilty. Society turned its back, and everything you were, your rights, your legacy, your body, was no longer yours. This wasn't justice. This was a cultural ritual, a public purification, a cleansing by exile. And the word that did it all was just 4 letters long. By now you understand. To be called argr wasn't just to be insulted. It was to be marked. Marked for exile, for oblivion, for a death that often came without blood but with silence. But what happened after the death? Nothing. That was the point. For most Vikings, death was not the end of the story. It was a doorway. If you died with honor, your name lived on. Your deeds were recited in sagas. Your children carried your spirit. Your grave was tended. Songs were sung. But for the Nidingur, the dishonored man, there was no such afterlife. No mound. No feast in Valhalla. No name on anyone's lips. You were not remembered. You were deleted. This was the cruelest part of all, the ritual of forgetting. Because in Norse belief, memory was immortality. The phrase from the Havamal said it plainly. Cattle die, kinsmen die, you yourself die. But one thing never dies, the name of him who gets a good reputation. But your name? It was stripped from the tongue, erased from the lineage, omitted from the story scrolls and genealogy lists passed down by your kin. You died a second death, a social, eternal death. And that death left no bones. No historian would quote you. No warrior would toast to you. Your descendants would learn your story only through shameful whispers, if at all. It's tempting to think of outlawry as a physical punishment. A man pushed into the woods, left to starve. But what the Vikings perfected was psychological execution. They didn't just want you dead. They wanted you unborn, your face forgotten, your voice unheard, your legacy turned to dust. That's what argr meant. Not weakness, not softness, non-existence. Now step back, breathe, and ask yourself, what kind of society fears a man who breaks the mold so deeply that it erases him? The Vikings lived in a brutal world. Harsh winters, blood feuds, and endless hunger for honor. But what they feared most wasn't death. It was dishonor. And the word argr became their scalpel. A word to cut the soul out of a man and leave him breathing. It wasn't about what he did. It was about what he threatened. He made people uncomfortable. He made masculinity unstable. And so he had to go. But if this sounds ancient, distant, safely buried beneath 1,000 years of time, look closer. What societies today still punish men for softness? What cultures still tie masculinity to dominance, silence, violence? What names do we use now to shame men who don't conform? What words, 4 letters, 5, 6, still function like ritual blades? Outlawry may be gone, but exile isn't. Today, it just wears different clothes. It looks like isolation, bullying, legal discrimination, social death. Families still erase, communities still silence, memory is still weaponized. And so the story of argr isn't ancient history. It's an ancient pattern, a reminder of how fragile honor can be when it's defined by fear, a warning about what happens when power decides who is man enough to belong. And in that warning, we find something else, a choice. To remember those who were forgotten, to speak the names that were buried, to resist the rituals of silence. Because in the end, the greatest rebellion against dishonor is memory.